Goldman is not only saying that it doesn't see a trade deal before the 2020 election, but that it does see, because of this trade quagmire, at least 3 rate cuts now. I assume they're talking about the one we've already had and 2 more to come, whether it comes before the September meeting and the other one scheduled 6 weeks after that. But that does seem to be a building consensus view. As to whether that is the case, let's explore this with Real Markets editor John Tamny, Independent Women's Forum's Hadley Heath Manning. Hadley, first on Goldman now dimly predicting no deal before the 2020 election. Do you agree with that?
Well, certainly the news about the currency manipulation designation doesn't sound encouraging when it comes to furthering trade talks with China. In a perfect world, Neil, of course, we wouldn't have designations like this. We wouldn't have tariffs. We wouldn't have the many complex issues that we're trying to work through with the Chinese. But that would be presuming that in a perfect world, we could trade freely with everyone acting in good faith. And the Chinese simply have not been doing that. And of course, this is about more than trade. It's about our national security. Those are all of the sort of confluence of factors that the United States has to consider, making this a very difficult trade deal to come to.
You know, John Tamny, the Chinese do not like being labeled a currency manipulator, but they do manipulate their currency. I mean, the very fact that they sent out a message today, they were stabilizing it, tells you all you need to know about that. But leaving that aside, these kind of revelations or charges don't advance the talk process, do they?
Well, they don't, but they also ignore the basic truth that China does what realistically every country in the world does, either implicitly or explicitly. The dollar is the world's currency. And because it factors into just about every global transaction, it is economic suicide for other countries to not peg their currencies in some ways to the dollar. So to designate the Chinese as manipulators is economically bankrupt, and it ignores the fact that the biggest problem is that the U.S. hasn't maintained a stable dollar for decades, and because it hasn't, it forces countries to do this. That the only way to maintain trade between countries is to have some kind of fixed relationship among the currencies. You know,
today, Hadley, we had, 4 of former Federal Reserve chiefs, Ben Bernanke and Alan Greenspan, Janet Yellen, Paul Volcker, all saying that this pressure on the Federal Reserve, they're clearly targeting the president without mentioning his name, is not constructive, that we have an independent Fed for a reason, and they bemoan that's being called into question. What did you think of that?
Well, certainly everything that's going on with the Fed and everything that's going on with trade policy, these are headwinds that we're seeing reflected in the market. But I will say, from a 30,000-foot view, the White House, President Trump and his administration, along with Congress via the tax cut package, they've been pursuing a domestic economic policy that has put us in a strong position as Americans. The Bureau of Economic Analysis last week releasing wage data, updates to wage data. Personal savings have increased. Business investment is going in the right direction. So this is encouraging, and it sort of suggests that now is the time for us as a country to be facing some of these hard things, whether it's renegotiating our trade deals, managing our interest rates. And so President Trump deserves, some credit for putting our domestic economy in a strong position through deregulation and through tax cuts. And of course, these other factors are things that we are going to have to continue to face no matter what shape our economy's in.
Back to whatever they're saying about the pressure and that it's not invited, the fact of the matter is, John, the markets have proven, and even critics of the Fed way beyond the president have proven, they overstepped their bounds here. They raised too much, too soon, and they're unwinding that. So the proof is in the pudding. Nevertheless, what they're saying is that the president needn't make it so publicly obvious. What do you think of that?
Well, I think they overstate it by a mile. The first thing I would say is that President Trump insults his own economic policies when he presumes that the Fed can somehow influence the economy one way or the other. Basically, central planning failed in the 20th century. But to pretend that the Fed has not always been politicized, and for Bernanke et al. To say that is just naive, and it's untrue. The Fed has always been somewhat of a tool of Washington, and pretend otherwise just isn't serious. But the main thing is the Fed can't improve an economy that's weakening, and it cannot weaken an economy that's growing. Both sides vastly overstate the Fed's power.
Guys, thank you very, very much.